Thank you, and thanks for having me. Thanks for joining, showing up so many. Thanks for the intro, Teresa. I'm a little bit intimidated by following your battlegrounds with a title of moving away from DAM and expanding the scope and seeing things in a broader context. No, in all seriousness, I actually think we agree on a lot of the points that you're also making. Just a few comments on me. Been with the LEGO Group for about 7 years within the in-house internal agency setup all the way through. Prior to LEGO, a background in tech, in startups, in management consulting. So in many ways, maybe not really a DAM person, more like a business development type profile, heading up business development teams within our agency setup and so forth. So a little bit interesting for me to also, in some of all the correspondence up to this event, talking about the DAM community and all those things. So, am I part of the DAM community or where am I actually sitting there? So that triggered some reflections for myself. But I think it actually is a little bit also a segue into what I'm talking about, because I think for us in the way we are going and the vision we are drawing up, we don't see DAM in isolation. Actually, we think that's part of the problems that we are challenged in our current setup, that things become too isolated. So very much also, as you talked to Teresa, the API enablement, the integrations, the linking things into the wider context is what I'll also be talking about. Just to give you a first glance at where are we in the LEGO Group in the DAM world. We started in terms of having an actual system and setup and platform back in 2007-8ish, with what we call LAP. LAP is an internal acronym for the LEGO Asset Portal. It's a custom-built UI with some elements of business logic, all placed on an Atom platform and an Atom backend. So the core system is Atom, but over time, more and more functionality, more and more UI has been placed outside of the core system in custom-built functionality and UI aspects, simply because the fit between our business needs and the core system wasn't always really there. Today we hold a bit more than 1 million assets, so it's not huge. I think there's probably people in the room who have a lot larger setups, but still quite significant. We produce about 30,000 assets a year, a number which is growing. So next year we'll produce significantly more. I'll touch upon why that is. We have about 15,000 registered users on the platform, of which at least 10,000 are active in the sense they are using it and have been using it with us within the last year. We have a lot of external and partner logins as well. And the assets we work with and the scope of what we do from a geographical point of view is that we translate a lot of the things we work with into about 32 different languages. And the kind of assets that we put onto the platform is everything from images, Maya files we want to get in there, InDesign files. Of course, we have all the standard stuff of Photoshops and JPEGs and all those things. We also store our short form content in terms of TV commercials, online videos, and so forth. Some of our long form is in a completely different setup, but we store previews of what we do for TV series and YouTube and so forth. We have product text, and we have all kinds of other stuff also in the platform. So in terms of file types and the sizes, it's also quite diverse platform that we are running. The way we have approached the DAM platform in LEGO, I think, is probably very, very typical and classical. So taking a step back, having an asset and content value chain where you'll probably draw this in many different ways. We talk about it as being comprised of 6 different steps, if you will. Planning and briefing, design and originating our core master assets, content creation in the digital space, localizing for channels and markets and so forth. And that's typically where the DAM platform comes into the play. Now the assets are done and ready for consumption, so we put them onto the platform. And then there is an execution phase where it's brought to life out in the real world somewhere. We do some performance and some tracking. And that's sort of the value chain we have around assets and content. And I would assume very similar to what a lot of what you guys are having. More and more also internally, we talk about, the whole analytics side, getting feedback, getting knowledge, how are assets actually performing and so forth. So we're of course also talking about this value chain as being less of a linear perspective and much more circular. How do we make these things inform and enrich themselves so that we build what you would call more of an ecosystem? Making sure that our performance data and our insights, whether it's in digital channels or elsewhere in the wider, a company or setup that we have, how that informs how we plan and mature our things. Trying to bridge the global to local divide that we also see where the stories about how assets produced in global don't really work out in local, so we have to do our own stuff, but that transparency doesn't really travel back, and the frustration back in the global teams of everything out in the local markets just Wild West. All those things we, of course, also have, and trying to tie that together is a core focus. But if we take a little bit a step away from theory and the 6 steps here, say what are actually the assets that we are talking about? Let's try to take a look at that, because maybe that circular perspective is not really that accurate either in terms of what we need. I've just taken an example here, sort of trying to follow the 6 steps in the approach. We have the planning, the list of what do we want to have in a campaign and all those things. And the first step in terms of producing content and assets for us most often is related to an actual model. So we've taken a Ninjago dragon here, produced in CG, in digital, in a digital version, rendered in 3D, and produces an image of that model, as we would call it, the actual dragon. That is then used as an input for producing box art and doing that whole layout. And the box art for us is still one of our most critical assets and marketing assets in itself. It's what really drives the value of the brand and the product. That combined with the physical catalog, still core assets for us. We need some product copy in there and some legal lines and all those things, and then we have the packaging done. And then the asset is actually done. But that becomes input when we start talking about content. So that becomes input to a setup where we have some lifestyle imaging where a child is playing with the model. We produce different versions of what the box art looks like, depending on whether it's for Facebook or wherever channel that goes on. We produce product detail pages, as you'll see. So that asset that we just talked about being actually a done box art is just input for something else that produces the next step, which is then translated into multiple languages. Keywords are replaced, adapted for different channels and so forth. So that content that we thought were done is still just input for something else. So that whole mindset of when an asset is done and ready to put on a DAM platform actually doesn't really make so much sense. And that's a core element in what we are trying to achieve in the platform that we will be building and aiming for in the future, is to break down that separation between work in progress and creative processes and final assets that go into a DAM platform and a DAM environment. It's the same thing. The big difference, coming back to some of the points around taxonomies and metadata, of course, is in these different steps, the metadata side of this is extremely different. Box art has one world of metadata, digital content, completely different setup, and so forth. So there's a lot of data that is being generated and needs to be handled also through these steps, where we at least see the big challenge in trying to get that data onto a DAM platform when it's disconnected from the creative processes. It's just not doable, really. So we lose all that information. And then I know there'll be vendors and others saying you just need AI and image recognition. Nah, let's not go there. We can use that for some things, but why throw away data to just regenerate it later? Why not combine it and try to have this as a continuous enrichment of the assets that we work on? So that's what we are trying to do in what we aim to build. So this is all visionary, nothing real. I'm totally free speech here, saying this is the North Star that we are aiming for in how we want to adopt, mature, and ultimately replace, I think, the platform that we have currently in place. So going back to the idea with the circular setup, I think we should see it much more as independent activities that can be done in many different sequences, can be orchestrated in many different ways. There's not an order to when you do what. It needs to happen much more free and in a way where you design your creative processes and your workflows depending on the needs in the different areas. If you do box art, if you do digital, if you do e-com, you would work in different ways and the sequencing might be different. But at the heart of everything, one source of truth. All of these different activities being orchestrated in one back-end environment. Not necessarily one system, but one environment. And we're taking out 4 of these activities from the briefing and the planning through our design and origination into content and at least some of the localization work that we are doing in our setups from a more global side. Say these combined is what we would like to call the digital asset creation and management ecosystem or platform or tool or whatever. So not just the DAM, but getting that creative process fully embedded. Whether an asset is final or work in progress, maybe it's both. Might be final for some purposes, work in progress for something else. So ultimately, it's not a question of which system it sits in, it's a question of how you tag it in the same system. Hopefully, we'll be able to orchestrate it in a way where we have all the assets that are created outside of our own setup. Obviously, we have the advantage of having a large-scale in-house agency, so a lot of the assets we are talking about are being produced by us. It's produced in-house, so we are in control of that creative process. But we also do a ton of stuff with external vendors that we can put requirements on. Say, how do we want that content to be delivered? How do we want that ingested into our environment? What kind of workflows should support that? But also workflow, task, and metadata supporting everything that we do through origination, content creation, localization, making these activities integrate and support each other on a combined repository architecture, so that we can release our assets for specific purposes and channels. That's what, in a super simplified way, what we are aiming to build. not for the agency only, but for asset and content creators throughout the organization. Some of the challenges that a DACM platform needs to be able to handle to work in our environment. OESP. So we are massively on that journey of revisiting our paid media strategies, going much more into our own channels. One of the effects of that change, dramatic increase in the needs for assets, producing way more assets. So I think we also need to work with the organization and our users and colleagues to change a little bit the mindset that we in many ways have around the DAM platform. It's not entirely, sorry? OESP is owned, earned, shared, and planned. So it's the different channels where assets live in the external environment, where the LEGO Group and others have for many years been very much focused on the paid media. So TV series or not series, TV commercials and marketing through paid channels. But the effect of that, especially if you want to target children, which we are all about, is diminishing. We just don't see TV the same way anymore. So the focus on our own channels in terms of the lego.com channel, our own social media channels, marketing through that whole digital environment becomes more and more important. But it also requires us to be producing, as I said, many more assets, because then you need something for Instagram, you need something for in different languages and so forth. But also it's cheaper. So with the same budget, you can produce many more assets because paid media just is so extremely expensive. Good question. So back to the mindset on the DAM. We have a front end, we have a user interface, we have this whole self-service mindset on a lot of the things that we are producing. But with the amount of assets that is today, 30,000 a year and growing, tagging that in a way where you can also build a user interface that actually makes it easy for a user to find the 3 assets they need, it's going to be extremely hard. I'm not even sure we're going to succeed. Sorry, John, but taxonomies and everything. So I think we need to think much more in a push setup, where when we know who created the asset, for which purpose, for which channel, we don't just stop at tagging it so that somebody can find it, we actually push it directly into that channel. So that we tell people, these are the 3 assets you should work with. You don't go find them through searching through all kinds of things, we just give them to you. Because we are so close with the content creators that we know which are relevant for you when. So much more of a push mindset down through the ecosystem, I think will be needed. We of course work in a global environment, not only in terms of our sales and so forth, but we produce our content through partners that sit all around the world. Some of our assets are big. If we talk about building instructions that go into a box, these are 15 gigabyte type files that we might want to send to Vietnam for some activities and then get them back. A huge problem. So we need to find a way for a platform to work much more in a co-creation mindset. We don't want to be continuously in this asset sharing mindset. We need to invite in people from all kinds of organizations, internal and external, to work on the same platform so that we keep the assets in one place, co-creating on that platform. So that's also a requirement we'll have. Asset types, we talked a little bit about it. Of course, we do tons of stuff in Photoshop, and we have all those classical file versions and file types. InDesign, massively important for us. So a platform needs to be able to handle InDesign files, not just you can always zip them and upload them, but actually handling the linked structures of an InDesign file. So are there vendors out there that have clever solutions to that? They can approach us. Maya, We do more and more in 3D and through CGI pipelines. About 30% or 70% of our portfolio today is CG enabled and not photo. So that whole handling of 3D files and Maya files as part of the creative setup, and therefore part of the DACM platform, is also a requirement we'll have. So we are stressing the boundaries a little bit also in terms of the types of assets we need to be able to handle. So we also realize that potentially there's a lot of this platform that we'll have to build ourselves, simply. We'll see. And there's, of course, confidentiality, a huge issue for us. There's a lot of street cred out there in the real world to be the first ones to break news about upcoming products. So this is a super important topic. Also, we are handling a lot of IP for others that we need to protect. And the new joker in the game, I'll speed up a little bit. I can see time is running, and we need a little bit of time for questions as well. As you may have heard, we just this spring signed a big partnership with Epic Games of moving into the metaverse, and it's a huge joker. What does that mean for asset and content creation in the future? It's going to be massive, but we don't know exactly what it is. What does assets look like when we talk metaverse? We need to figure that out, but it needs to be part of what this platform, what this approach can prepare us for. Just to give you a little bit of a hint about what kind of confidentiality management are we dealing with. A couple of years ago, we had these Marvel superhero movies around, I think it's called the Infinity Saga. And we, of course, produce SKUs and boxes to support these movies and many different types of assets associated with that. So we have a box, but there's also parts of what becomes the box art that are separate assets in their own right. All something that we need to handle, all related to the same product. But if we take a closer look, up here we have, as part of the box art, we have Captain America holding his shield. Now for Endgame, that's actually a movie spoiler. I haven't seen the movies myself, but in the previous movies, he lost the shield or gave it away, and it's one of the clues in the movie that he gets it back. So these might be assets that are all related to the same product, the same launch, but all of a sudden, that one asset is super, super critical and very confidential, whereas the other is a piece of cake. But it's the same product, so it's that type of granularity that we need to be handled. So these two images look kind of the same, right? But from a confidentiality point of view, super different in this context. And that's the level of granularity that we need to be able to handle, but also manage. Because, you know, if you produce 40,000 assets and you need to manually enter confidentiality dates on all of them, that doesn't really work. So you need that hierarchy and inheritance to work in terms of those regulations. So that's to give you a little bit of an idea of where we're trying to go and some of the challenges we're facing and some of the questions we'll have to vendors out there who think they can help us. You know, this is what you need to help us solve. Thanks for your time. I don't know, let me see if we have questions coming in.
Yeah, we certainly do.